Mark Billings is gay. Until recently, he was also a policeman.
This is the area we used to come on slack nights for a bit of sport. We used to just creep up here in panda cars very quietly, and at the given signal we'd chase all the gays through the undergrowth and frighten the life out of them. It was all a bit of a laugh to some of the policemen.
This gay man is another former policeman. And tonight, they'll both be talking from their own experience about police treatment of homosexuals. Relations between gays and the police are usually cordial, as here on last year's Gay Pride March. But many gays are suspicious of the police and believe that on other occasions their conduct amounts to harassment. In this programme, we're going to examine the truth of these allegations. But first, we need to look at the way that the law applies to gay men. In 1967, homosexual acts between consenting men over 21 became legal. But it's not legal for gay men to make sexual advances to each other. If a gay man tries to approach 2 or more men, he can be charged with persistent importuning. This doesn't normally apply to heterosexuals, unless they're prostitutes. A heterosexual man, for instance, can approach a woman with impunity. But as long as the law on importuning stands, the police have a clear duty to enforce it. And in 1978, 715 men were found guilty of this offence in England and Wales. And gay men often bring the law down on themselves. These men are congregating outside a gay bar, and it's not unusual in places like this for some of them to try to make contact with each other. But although the police have a duty to enforce the law, many gays believe that their methods are unacceptable. One frequent allegation is that the police use agents provocateurs. That is, they use decoys to actually encourage gays to break the law. Bob Squirrel was arrested for persistent importuning after leaving a pub in Earl's Court.
I'd been to the Coleherne for a couple of pints, and at closing time I decided I felt like some fish and chips, so I went into the chip shop here. But there was a long queue, so I decided I wouldn't hang around. And immediately I came out and I saw someone looking at me from the doorway of the Troubadour. Decided he was quite attractive, so I went up to him after a second or two, and he immediately said, do you want to come back to my place? It's just the other side of the Cromwell Road. So I said, sure, fine, and we started to walk up towards the traffic lights. We walked along, and when we reached about here, the guy I was walking with took hold of my right arm, and someone came up from the outside, from the curbside, and took hold of my left arm. My first reaction was that they were after my wallet, as it's quite a common occurrence around here, and I started to protest and try to get away from them. But they produced their identity cards and said they were police officers, and I'd been under observation for about 20 minutes, and I was going to be arrested and charged with persistently importuning for an immoral purpose, as they said.
Bob Squirrel is sure that the police deliberately lured him into a trap, although at his trial they denied this. In the event, he was found not guilty. Peter Condren had a very similar experience when he and a friend left the same coffee bar one evening.
I walked down towards Redcliffe Gardens. I noticed there was quite a few people around, and there was a man on the other side of the road who was eyeing my friend up. My friend went over in person and started to chat him up. I was getting pretty impatient and wanted to go home. But my friend kept talking, and I walked up and down, whistling. I noticed another gay in a doorway, looking me up and down. I said it was a cold evening, to be friendly. He looked a bit suspicious, and I didn't say much. He offered me a lift. By now I was pretty fed up, and I decided to accept. Which way are you going, he says. I said, to Holland Park. He took me down to his van, a plain blue Transit, parked in Finsborough Road. As soon as we got there, he produced an ID and said he was a police officer and arrested me for persistently importuning. It was ridiculous, as I hadn't importuned anybody.
At his trial, Peter Condren was acquitted. The police said that they had been keeping the area under observation when he had approached them, but they flatly denied encouraging him or acting as agent provocateur. It would be widely regarded as unacceptable if they did act in this way. In 1957, when Lord Wolfenden was considering whether the law on homosexuality should be changed, he said in his report,
"It would be open to the gravest objection if a police officer deliberately provoked an act."
and the Home Office take the same view. They lay down strict guidelines for the police, and these explicitly forbid the use of agents provocateurs.
No member of the police force should counsel, incite or procure the commission of a crime.
Occasionally, the police do admit to using undercover agents, but only to trap criminals in serious cases like robberies or drug smuggling. But do they use agents provocateurs against gay men? Both the Metropolitan Police and the Police Federation declined to appear on this programme to put their position. So we asked Brian Hilliard of the magazine Police Review whether he thought that the police did use agents provocateurs against gay men.
I'd be extremely surprised at the allegation. I can't see any reason for it. The prosecution of homosexual offences is a very small part of everyday duty in the Metropolitan Police. It's a very, shall we say, unwelcome part of the duty, and the only times that police, I think, go out to enforce laws against male importuning are when there have been public complaints about it. And if there have been public complaints, quite obviously there are sufficient offences going on for police to get all the, shall I say, all the arrests they feel they need without trapping people into it.
But Mark Billings, who left the police force to join a security firm because of his colleagues' attitudes towards gays, says that the police do use agents provocateurs.
They always denied they use agents provocateurs. It was always this duty officer would choose a couple of the youngest policemen they were and tell them to go home, put some tight-fitting jeans on, some good clothes on, and go out and flirt with the gay community, if possible. They'd only be on this detail for about a month at a time, because if they did it longer than that, they'd be very well known, and it would reflect on the police that they were using agents provocateurs, and then they couldn't deny it.
Hello, gay switchboard.
So it seems that agents provocateurs may be used, but it's hard to get a sense of how often.
Hello, gay switchboard. Can I help you?
Are you afraid of being overheard?
Yeah.
Gay Switchboard operates a 24-hour-a-day helpline service and receives 160,000 inquiries a year.
I think he has to give you notice.
Statistics on the use of agents provocateurs is extremely difficult to obtain, but there are three very useful and interesting guidelines on their use. Firstly, there are the statistics of the Gay Switchboard, and secondly, the statistics gathered by the Gay Legal Advice Service. They show that monthly and indeed weekly inquiries are made to those organisations which indicate that agents provocateurs have been used by the police. The third way of telling how often agents provocateurs are used is by the experience of lawyers in court. And my own experience over the last 18 months is that they are quite definitely used on a regular basis.
It seems reasonable to conclude that the police probably do use agents provocateurs, at least occasionally, and in clear breach of the Home Office guidelines and their own public pronouncements. The cases we've been looking at where agents provocateurs seem to have been used were cases of persistent importuning. But there is another offence relating to gay men where police conduct is also widely criticised. This is the offence of gross indecency. While it has been legal since 1967 for two consenting men over 21 to engage in a homosexual act, it has to be in private. If any third person could conceivably see them, it's defined as being in public, and so is illegal. The offence would then be gross indecency, and again, it's a law which is applied almost exclusively to gay men. In 1978, for instance, 1,948 men were convicted in England and Wales. Its most common occurrence is in what are called cottaging cases, cases where men are accused of trying to make contact in public lavatories. Many people allege that in enforcing this law, the police too often arrest innocent gays, trump up charges against them, and trade on their shame and anxiety to get them to plead guilty.
Okay.
The police have an enormous psychological advantage over gay people. Gays are arrested on what they often consider to be trumped-up charges. They're taken to local police stations, they're held in cells overnight, fingerprints are taken, photographs are taken. They're questioned by a number of different police officers and are told that they're going to appear in a magistrate's court the next morning, where a number of possibly very unpleasant things are going to be said against them. It's in those circumstances that gay people often feel very tempted to plead guilty, even if they know that they have not committed the offence that is said that they have committed. And the police put an enormous amount of pressure on them to say that they are guilty so that it can all be over and done with in a matter of a few hours, and that their real innocence will not be shown to the courts.
Bob Cant was arrested for gross indecency one night when he stopped at a public lavatory on his way home. There was another man standing near him.
I didn't look at him. I didn't make any attempt to touch him. He didn't make any attempt to touch me. I have to say that, I mean, I might have been fantasizing. I really can't remember now, but it is very possible. I mean, for a lot of gay men, I mean, going into cottages is quite a turn on. And I think I'd been there about 2 minutes when 2 policemen came in, one from each entrance, and one had a massive great arc lamp which shone on us. And I mean, I immediately knew what had happened. I just went completely numb. And we were taken outside and cautioned and warned that anything we said might be used in evidence against us. And I just didn't know what to do. I mean, I knew exactly what was happening to me. It was as if I had expected to be arrested. I mean, I think all gay men have got this feeling that sometime they might actually be arrested, and I just went along with it. I couldn't have been a better sort of person to arrest for the police.
Bob Cant was charged with gross indecency, but decided to plead not guilty.
The police evidence arrived about 6 weeks after I'd been arrested. And in many ways, that was a much worse shock than actually being arrested itself. I don't know what I'd thought the police would say, but their evidence was just a pack of lies.
When Bob Cant's case came to court, he was found not guilty. Another recent case involves a man whom we shall simply call Paul. He was driving to visit his aunt on a Sunday night, and here at Crouch End stopped to use a public lavatory. According to his story, he'd just gone down the steps when he heard someone outside say, "When you hear the screams, you'll know what's happened." 2 men entered, and Paul, convinced that they were queer bashers, slipped back up the steps and along the road to his car. He drove the few yards to these lights, which were against him. But as he stopped, he says that the 2 men came over to the car, shouting to him to open the window or they'd break it.
Come on, open this window.
Thinking he was in real danger of being mugged, he drove across the lights. One of the men hit the back of the car as he went. Just a little further down the road, he was stopped by 2 squad cars, an unmarked police car and a police van. It was only when Paul saw the 2 men get out of one of the cars and noticed that they had radios that he realized they were policemen. He was arrested and charged. But later, when the case came to court, he was found innocent. Our last case is that of a man arrested for gross indecency in a lavatory in Hyde Park.
It was the middle of the day and I wanted to go to the loo. None of the cubicles had any locks on the doors, but all of them were empty, so I looked for the cleanest. I sat down and began to read my newspaper. Just a bit later, I became aware that someone else had entered the adjacent cubicle. There's a small gap under the partitions, and after a few moments, I noticed that he seemed to be trying to attract my attention with his foot. I didn't make any response. I thought, well, that was that. But seemingly within seconds, his door and mine were pushed open by a policeman, and both myself and the other guy were asked to come out, and we were arrested for gross indecency. The whole charge was clearly absurd. When the case came to court, the police evidence was finally shot down by using plans of the lavatory and photographs of the various vantage points which the police claimed that they had used. It was clearly quite impossible for them to have seen what they said they could have seen. The policeman who arrested me said in court that he'd been perched on top of a tea chest, looking through a back window of the lavatory. that he could actually see me lying on the floor. As you can see, the view from the window shows nothing. So the case was thrown out by the jury, but only after a 3-day trial. Heaven knows what that cost the taxpayer.
It would be silly and naive of me to deny that police ever fabricate evidence. The overzealous officer, and I'm not defending his perjury in this case, but there are cases in which the overzealous officer will in fact say that he's seen what is going on when he knows it's going on. He hasn't actually seen it. That's about the extent of fabrication.
But to Mark Billings, as well as members of the legal profession we spoke to, fabrication of evidence seems to go further than just the occasional white lie.
Well, the police do fabricate evidence. It's very easy for them. They just go out, pick somebody up and arrest them. And although they're only supposed to respond to complaints by members of the public, they always manage to invent one. The usual one is the little old lady with her pram, who's a very good witness. They usually then go back to the station and they're able to sit in the canteen together. They write their evidence together, so they make sure they got the story just right and nobody can really contest it.
As regards the fabrication of evidence by police officers, I can only speak from my own experience. But all too often, officers, once they leave the security of their notebooks, which they read out in court, contradict each other, and there are discrepancies between them of such a nature which are so substantial that it leads one to the inevitable conclusion that the evidence which they're giving to the court has been fabricated.
So London gays seem to have some justification for their belief that the police treat them unfairly. But these practices are difficult to combat because they happen at random.
There is clearly no evidence of a conspiracy by the police against gays. But I think it is much more a case of prejudice at a local level, in that individual police stations and individual police officers decide that they are going to go on what sometimes amounts to campaigns of harassment against gay people.
A memorandum was issued from Scotland Yard. Whether it was issued to other stations, I don't know. Pressure had been applied to Scotland Yard from the National Council for Civil Liberties, asking policemen to lay off gay people. The lower ranks, constable and sergeants, took this as the people higher up were trying to mollycoddle gay people, and that evening in particular they went out to arrest as many gay people as possible.
Both for the older blokes, it's sport. They've got all their arrests and don't need any more, so they can just have a great deal of fun with the gay community. Take them to the police station, hand the arrest over to a younger officer who needs the arrest for his numbers to get on in the service, and also there's a financial incentive, being he gets overtime payments at court. To the older policemen, the gay community are fair game because they consider they're all child molesters, basically the scum of the earth anyway, and everything they get they deserve.
The police can indulge prejudices like these because gays are vulnerable. At night, Clapham Common is a known meeting place for homosexuals. Gay men who use public places like this to pick up partners are, of course, laying themselves open to police action. But it's often hard to see that the police are responding to real public anxiety.
Police cars would come along here where I'm walking. One would branch off up here, and one would branch off up there, and one would come in from the other end up there. They all come in with their lights switched off, and very, very quietly they cruise at a very slow speed so nobody could hear them coming. They were all in radio contact, so at the given signal, they all switched the lights on, read very, very hard, and beat their horns and went straight into the undergrowth over there, and of course frightening the life out of any person that was in the undergrowth. And you'd see various people pulling their trousers up and disappearing off to the road towards the end, where they usually had a police car waiting to stop anyone that come out to ask them why they'd come out of there and what they were doing in there. The police didn't really worry about what people were doing there. It was just a great laugh to them, and they didn't care about the consequences. One officer I was with, when the council were on strike, drove through the undergrowth when the grass was about 2 or 3 feet high. I said to him, what happens if we hit somebody? He says, why worry about it? That's one less pervert to worry about. And after it was all over, they'd just go back to the police station, sit in the canteen and swap campaign stories, have a good joke and a laugh about it.
Instead of going out and arresting everybody within sight, which is an impossibility, local officers sometimes solve the problem by a deterrent ray. They might drive their cars at a group or shine their headlights on them to frighten people off, and possibly out of a very chauvinistic sense of humour as well.
But events occur in other parts of London which also raise questions about police practice.
I came down to court to see what was going on, and I had about 20 minutes with about 8 people who had all been held at Holland Walk by the police at about 3 in the morning, closing both ends, telling everybody to stay where they were. Now, from what the people involved told me, I would have taken it that either they were not guilty or that the case was certainly unprovable. But in each case, they seem to have been put into pairs, from what they told me, again, by the police, and given certain stories that they were supposed to agree to, all with this idea that it would all be dealt with on the spot and that it would be finished with. One of them was rather reticent about this, didn't want to plead guilty, but his co-defendant insisted on pleading guilty. And there was really what I can only describe as a sort of hysteria involved, that they just wanted, whatever happened, to get out and to get it finished with that day. There was nothing I could do. They wouldn't even ask for a solicitor. They then all pleaded guilty.
It seems to be the potential shame and disgrace of a court case which makes even innocent gays plead guilty.
On Clapham Common, for instance, the people that you tended to get there were people who were more shy and frightened to go to gay clubs. And once taken back to the police station, they would be shy, maybe because they have an important job, and they would be all too pleased to plead guilty in court and not receive any publicity over it, and it could be hid away from maybe their family, etc.
I was fairly sorted out in my own head about how I felt about my own gayness. Even despite all that, it was an incredibly difficult period to live through. It was probably the most difficult period of my life. And I think had I not come out, it would have been unbelievably nightmarish. And I think the police know that. I think they know that lots of gay men can't face that kind of period of waiting. They can't face the kind of pain and the misery that they'd have to live through. And so they plead guilty, and that way they think they'll get it over with quickly.
Those with experience in these matters argue that the way innocent gays must deal with this problem is by pleading not guilty.
Really, this kind of malpractice can only be stopped if people are prepared to stand up for their rights, and they're prepared to say, if they are innocent, that they will not plead guilty. They should ask for an adjournment, they should see a solicitor, they should be advised about their rights, and they must fight if they are innocent. And it's only in this way that this kind of police misbehaviour can be brought to an end.
Obviously, it was a very traumatic experience, but I'm really glad now that I did plead not guilty and fought the case. And my advice to anyone who finds himself in a similar situation is to plead not guilty.
I think it's very important that we always stand up for ourselves. I'm in fact glad to be gay, and my experience of winning this case, even despite all the pain, has made me feel even more certain about that.
But it's not just up to gays. The duty of the police is not simply to enforce laws, but to choose which laws they enforce and with what zeal. In 1957, in his report, Lord Wolfenden said,
"It is essential that the police should be above suspicion, and we believe that if there is to be an error in the one direction or the other, it would be better that a case of this comparatively trivial crime should occasionally escape the courts than that the police as a whole should come under suspicion."
The way the police are enforcing these laws, gross indecency and importuning laws, are very expensive and a complete waste of police manpower and time. It costs an enormous amount of money having policemen hiding in bushes in parks for hours on end, or standing up, clambering up the side of lavatory walls, looking in windows. And then the cases come to court. there's legal aid, cost of operation of the legal system. And at a time of police shortage of manpower, it's very much in the police interests if they stop these prosecutions and get on with the real fight against crime.